This is actually a resurfaced video clip of Netanyahu from 2015. It is now trending on social media. But like many viral clips, it's missing context. And I'm going to explain that. But first, here's the clip.
Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. And Haj Amin al-Husseini went to Hitler and said, if you expel them, they'll all come here. So what should I do with them? He asked. He said, burn them.
Okay. Time magazine and the Times of Israel covered this back in 2015 when this clip originated and concluded that Netanyahu was using this conversation out of context, that that's not what was said, and I'll tell you exactly where he got that idea, but he was using this conversation out of context, and that his goal in doing so was to argue that Palestinians aren't really upset over the occupation and the brutal treatment by the Israelis. They just hate Jews. That's what he was trying to argue. It's not us that's causing the Palestinians. We're not doing anything to the Palestinians to cause them to rise up and hate us and react in violence. They just hate Jews. They're just anti-Semites. That's what he was trying to prove. So where did Netanyahu get this idea? This was never said in this conversation. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was the Palestinian Muslim who was in charge of the Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem at the time when it was under the British mandate. And this conversation between Hitler and the Grand Mufti happened in 1941. So the Ottoman Empire had control over the region for a while until World War I, when they were defeated and the British ended up getting all of this land from the Ottomans, and the British were in control. So the British had control over Transjordan, Palestine, and Mesopotamia after World War I, essentially. So all of these Arabs that were living in these areas had been under Ottoman control, and then they were under British control. And what they wanted was their own independence. That's what they were angling for. So Netanyahu first got this idea that the Grand Mufti said, well, burn them. You know, that Hitler was like, well, I just want to expel them. And the Mufti said, no, burn them. He got this idea after World War II, when one of the SS men responsible for the execution of the final solution was during the Nuremberg trial. He had made this claim that it was al-Husseini who had recommended the killing of Jews to Hitler and the Nazi leaders. Now, this was greatly contested at the time. Many other people, including Germany, has come out and said that is absolutely false. That did not happen. We have a record of what that conversation was, and that this SS leader was just trying to defect blame. He was just trying to say, oh, it wasn't Germany. It was the Muslims. It was them. They were the ones who wanted to do it. That is where Netanyahu got that idea. However, the conversation between the Grand Mufti and Hitler was actually documented and recorded. People know what was said. So let's go over what was originally, what was actually said during that meeting. But first, before we get to the actual meeting and what was said, I want to give you a little bit of background info of what was happening at the time. So again, the British at this time were controlling Transjordan, Palestine, and Mesopotamia. So they had, which is now modern day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. And it kind of bled into some other areas, but the British had control over these areas. Now, during the Zionist movement to create the land of Israel inside of Palestine started in the late 1800s. That's when the modern day Zionist movement started. There were previous Zionist aspirations prior to the current and most, and it's been the most successful in modern times, this current Zionist movement, modern day Zionism, that started in the late 1800s. And it started off with just Theodor Herzl, who was an Austrian Jew that wanted to create a home for Jews someplace. And there were actually a few different places that were proposed, and we're going to get into some of the places that were proposed rather than it landing where it landed, where it is today. But we had a very difficult time actually getting, when he decided and ended up with, well, we're going to do it in the homeland, we're going to do it in Palestine. Now, Theodor Herzl was not a religious Jew at all. In fact, he was very much against the religion, and you can actually watch the interview that I did with Rabbi Shapiro. That was a couple of weeks ago. If you just search for that, you can watch that. And he is a a historian on the movement, a historian on Judaism as a religion, obviously as a rabbi, but he also really is one of the foremost experts on Zionism in the movement. And he said that the founders of Zionism did not like Judaism at all. They wanted to actually get rid of the religion, and they wanted Jews to be more viewed as an ethnic group and not as a religious group. So he hated the religion. But why he chose that region was because many Jews were still very religious, and he figured that he could actually get them to go and create a Jewish nation if he somehow tied it to religion. So it was like, hey, why don't we just take back the homeland? This is what God said. God, he didn't even believe in. So he says, God says this is the land. So this could get more people to actually go for religious reasons. His only goal was to create a Jewish nation. The only way you could create a Jewish nation is you need people, and you need lots of people if you're going to be doing this. If it's going to be a powerful big nation, you need a lot of people. So he knew that he had a lot of different motivating factors. Some of the motivating factors that Herzl talked about was war and fear. People would be motivated by fear, by persecution to go. That was one of the reasons he started the movement, was because the persecution of the Jews in the European world, including Russia. And so he knew fear would be a factor. He also thought religion would be a factor. People would go because they just wanted to religiously be closer to their homeland. A return to the homeland would be a factor. Kind of a romantic idea would be a factor. So he had a lot of different ways that he thought that he could motivate people to actually populate the area. He ended up dying. The movement went on. During the movement, there was a period of time when the Zionists were looking for anybody and everybody who would help them. They didn't care. They had no real loyalty to anybody but their movement, their idea. You've got to be, when you think about the type of person who decides to create a nation from nowhere, you've got to be a serious person, right? You've got to be seriously committed to this cause. Most people would give up. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be bloody. So most people give up. Most people are not natural explorers and colonizers, right? Not very many people would get on the ship, and it's a different bunch. It's a different mentality. Even just today, the people that leave their countries, that go and try to immigrate to a new country in a place where they don't know the people, they don't know the language. It takes a certain type of personality to decide to leave the comfort of your home and leave the comfort of familiarity and go and do something like that. So keep that in mind. So it's an extra layer of an interesting personality if you're like, I'm just going to create a nation from nothing. Okay, so that's you have to be pretty extreme in your mind in order to do something like that. So the people who continued on the Zionist movement were very extreme, and they were willing to really partner with anybody in order to accomplish their goals. And they actually, in the early, right after World War I, and during that time, they worked with the British. They went to the British and said, now that you guys have the land, we want a part of this for ourselves. And the British, at the behest of, they were lobbied by a lot of powerful people with a lot of money, including the Rothschilds. And they said, oh, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and put a land for Jews inside of Palestine. They did not say Palestine would be the home for the Jews. They just said, we'll put it inside of Palestine. We'll agree to that. That was something that in the Zionist movement, they had already started moving people over to that land. They were working with the Ottomans at the time, bringing Jews over. And when the Ottoman Empire fell, then the Zionists said, well, we better go talk to the British because now they're in charge. So then they went over to the British and they started talking to them more. And the British said, okay, you've been doing this for a couple of 30 years at that point. You've been immigrating people in. It's going slow. We get it. But yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll allow you to keep immigrating people over and whatnot. Until the British, and this is an important part because this is a theme that continues to reoccur. The British then said, we will go ahead and give you a home inside of Palestine. They wrote this up, they declared it. And the Arabs in the region said, what? You're going to do what? We have been wanting independence. This is our home. We're already here. There's not very many of them. We want independence. Don't give our land away to a group of foreigners who are coming in from Europe. And the British saw that the Arabs were very uncomfortable with this, and they said, oh, gee. A few years later, the British said, okay, we change our mind. This is not a good idea. The Arabs are not happy. They do not want you there. They don't want a bunch of immigrants flooding their borders, and this is just a bad idea. So the British actually backtracked on the idea of creating a Jewish nation inside Palestine. This obviously really upset the Zionists. So after a period of time when Germany started rising up and there was clearly animosity between the Germans and the Brits, and the writing was on the wall, the Zionists went to Germany and they worked with the Nazi government, and they went to them and they said, hey, so we have a common enemy, the British. You don't like the British. We don't like the British. The British are against us. They won't let us realize our dreams. You don't like the British for your own reasons. Let's work together. And we have another common goal, which is you don't like the Jews. The Jews are causing you a problem. There's a Jewish question all throughout Europe. We have a solution, and that is we're trying to get all the Jews to come live in our land that we want to create a nation. Germany said, okay, I guess that works. You'll be on our side. We'll solve our problem. You won't like the British. You're going to fight against the British, and we will immigrate the Jews over to Palestine. So the Nazis and the Zionists actually collaborated because they had a shared goal of expelling Jews and a shared common enemy, which is they didn't like the British. One of the collaborations, there's many collaborations, but I'm going to point to two of them specifically. One of them was the Havara Agreement. And this was a major factor in making possible the migration of about 60,000 German Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 1939. What the agreement did was it allowed German Jews to sell their assets in Germany in exchange for, they could take that money and they could then buy essential goods that were made in Germany that would then be shipped by the Germans to Palestine. So it would allow them to transfer their wealth to Palestine. This was the Havara Agreement. Now, just before the agreement, another event that happened was two couples, in order to get, to kind of cement this friendship between the Zionists and the Nazis, two couples, one of them a Nazi couple, the other a Jewish couple, took a trip together to Palestine only 2 months after Hitler's appointment as Chancellor of the German Reich, and also after his first legislation against non-Aryans. And the two couples, so it was the Nazi couple and the Jewish couple, both German, traveled to Palestine. Leopold von Mildenstein, who would eventually become the head of the SS department dealing with Jews, him and his wife, along with Kurt Tuschler, who was a German Jewish Zionist, and his wife, they all took the trip together. And according to documentations and diaries, Mildenstein was very excited about the building going on in the land. He even attempted to say a few words in Hebrew and generally tried to act in a cultured manner. Mildenstein then continued to advocate the relocation of Jews to the British Mandate up until 1936, when he was then replaced as the SS point man for Jewish issues by Adolf Eichmann, who eventually helped orchestrate the mass murder of Jews in the final solution. So there was this sort of, there was this friendship, and in fact, the historians have shown that Mildenstein and Tuschler continued to be friends even through the Holocaust and after that. They actually wrote letters to one another, and that they were friendly even throughout that entire time. There was even coins that were made in commemoration of the friendship between the Zionists and the Nazis. One side of the coin had a Nazi swastika, the other side had the Star of David, and there were collector coins that you can actually go and collect at this if you can find them. So there was this collaboration. Somewhere along the line, the Nazis changed their attitude about the Zionists. Okay, so but this is where things get slightly muddy when it comes to history. A lot of history, it's difficult sometimes to find things, to find out what caused this. It is unclear why or how the attitude changed. It's unclear if Hitler himself was ever in favor of the Jews immigrating to Palestine, or if that was more some of the other members of the Nazi Party. And then when Hitler was more involved, then he was like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to do something else. But it doesn't quite look like that. I think what actually happened, again, it's hard to find this stuff when it comes to history, is when you're connecting the dots, what actually looks like happened is that the reason why the Nazis changed their mind was because once again, when the Nazis said, yeah, let's do it, they kind of had the same thing happen that the British had, which is They got there, they thought, well, okay, yeah, cool, you guys can have the land. Sure, we'll make a Jewish nation here. And then the Arabs said, what the hell are you talking about? We live here. This is our land. You cannot just give it away. For one, it's not even yours. It's the British, for one, still. And why are you helping them settle and buy land and use German assets, German money in order to do this? Why are you doing this? We don't like it. We're here. We're not happy. The Germans seemed to realize that the Arabs were also not happy with the British. Everybody hated the British at this time. So the Zionists hated the British, the Germans hated the British, and the Arabs hated the British because they were under British rule and they wanted their own land. And they were not sure what the British were going to do when it came to that. And they were mad that the British had the mandate in the beginning saying, yeah, this is going to be a home for Jews. So the Arabs didn't trust the British. The Arabs then went to the Germans and said, don't do this to us. The British tried to do it. Don't do this to us. We want our own land. Stop. And it looks like that is when Germany changed their mind on helping the Zionists build in Palestine. It looked like the Germans realized, maybe we want the Arabs on our side. Maybe we don't want to upset them. Maybe it's better to have an army of Arabs at our disposal than have a land that's going to fight us. At the time, we're going to get there. They're going to fight us. They're not going to want us around because they know that we're here just to create a nation for somebody else. That is what it looks like. What happened is that everybody was against the British and the Germans were trying to make friends with everyone. So the Germans seemed like they were placating the Zionists. They were placating the Arabs for a bit. Everybody hated the British. Now, according to the records, when this meeting happened between the Mufti and Hitler, that happened in 1941. And the Mufti went there and said, this is after he's already made it clear that he'd been writing letters to Hitler and to Nazis saying, what are you guys doing? We don't want them here. This is our land. We're trying to gain independence. And he basically went to Hitler to say, help us get our independence. We will side with you and we will fight the British. We'll fight the British and the Arabs will rise up. The Mufti said, I could go around and I could get a lot of Arab support from the surrounding nations. But, just give us the green light and we will rise up against the British and we'll help you with the war. And Hitler said, now is not the time. We're not ready yet. And this was in 1941. So the Arabs promised Germany that they would help them against the British in exchange for independence. And interestingly, at the same time, the Zionists were also fighting the British because they felt like the British weren't giving them what they wanted, which was their Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now, according to the records, Germany, about this meeting, the actual records about this meeting, Germany's fundamental attitude was clear. Germany stood for uncompromising war against the Jews, including, obviously, the national home in Palestine. Germany was at the present time engaged in a life and death struggle with two citadels of Jewish power, Great Britain and Soviet Union. Ideologically, the war was a battle between National Socialism and the Jews. And Germany would, of course, help others involved in this war of survival or destruction. These are the words they were using. And Germany, Hitler said, was resolved step by step to ask one European nation after the other to solve its Jewish problem, and at the proper time to direct a similar appeal to non-European nations as well. Sounds oddly familiar if you just swap out the players. Never in this conversation did the Mufti say, burn them. Never in this conversation did Hitler say, I'm just looking to expel them. What do you want to do? And the Mufti said, kill them all. Never in this conversation did this happen. It didn't happen at all. That was the testimony of an SS officer trying to save his skin, and everybody said that guy's lying. So in this conversation, also what historians have said is that by the time this conversation happened, the program was already set up to exterminate. That was already in motion, in fact, well before the Mufti arrived in Berlin. That was already something. So the Mufti had nothing to do with the final solution. It was already in play. And not only that, did he have nothing to do with it, but that was not even discussed in that meeting. That's not what was going on. What the Mufti wanted was he didn't want the Jews coming to his homeland. That is true. He did not want them there. Hitler didn't want them in Germany. And the Arabs didn't want them, a bunch of European Jewish settlers moving into Palestine. That is true. Again, when you look at this testimony, according to the records, Germany's fundamental attitude was Germany stood for uncompromising war against the Jews. We hear that now. Uncompromising war against Hamas, including the national home in Palestine. They were against they were against that idea of a national home inside of Palestine. We hear that from the Likud party of Netanyahu. We're against the national home for Palestine inside of Israel, saying that ideologically the war was a battle between National Socialism and the Jews, and that Germany would, of course, help others because this was a war of survival or destruction. Where are we hearing that now? This is a war of survival or destruction. Sounds oddly familiar. And then Hitler going and saying that he would go to European nation after European nation to solve its Jewish problem. And at the proper time, he would then go to and appeal to non-European nations as well. What does that sound like? Going to Arab nation after Arab nation after Arab nation saying, help us with our Palestinian problem. And then if the Arab nations won't take them, maybe somebody else will. At that time, nobody wanted the Jews. We hear this argument now, happening now. We hear people saying nobody wants those Palestinians. Something must be wrong with them if their fellow Arab nations won't take them. Well, could you apply that same logic and say nobody wanted the Jews in Europe, and so therefore something must have been wrong with them? No, we don't apply that. So why would you then apply it to another group of people? You only do that if you don't view them as human beings. You only do that to a group of people if you think, well, these are human animals. These are not human beings.